morning, welcome, and thank you for participating in tonight's virtual town hall hosted by Tacoma's 27th District legislators, Speaker Lori Jenkins, Representative Jake Fye, and Senator Yasmin Trudeau. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We'll start tonight's event by relaying those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit a question live in the comments section of the platform from which you are watching. Please submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can over the next hour. Before we get started, the lawmakers will give some brief opening remarks. Speaker Jenkins, would you like to get us started?
Thanks, Aaron. It's great to be here with you all this evening, and I'm excited to be able to talk about some of our legislative session with you and to respond to your questions. Just so you know a little bit about me and where I come from. I was elected to the legislature 12 years ago. That's hard for me to believe because I still feel like a little bit of a newbie in the legislature. That's one of the great things about this job. I'm constantly learning things, and it's wonderful to have a job like this. I've served on any number of committees, but the ones that I've spent the most time on have been the Health and Human Services, or excuse me, the Healthcare Committee, the Health and Wellness Committee. In the House. I spent 10 years before I became Speaker on that committee. And then I chaired the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. Also, I sat on the Appropriations Committee, which was the primary budget writing committee. But I've actually served on all three budget writing committees throughout my service in the House. I've served on the Transportation Committee earlier, as well as the Capital Budget Committee. In 2019, I was elected Speaker of the House. Now I only serve on one committee. It's the House Rules Committee, and it's the committee that decides what bills are eligible to move to the floor. But I serve as Speaker, so my job is to manage the whole place in a lot of ways. And I don't actually sponsor legislation myself, but basically every bill that goes off the floor of the House is a bill that I've reviewed and worked on somewhat. So that's my perspective.
So
should I kick it to you?
I will go second. I guess I'm second in seniority in representing the good citizens of the 27th District. I've been in the legislature 10 years. Prior to that time, I was on the Tacoma City Council for 7 years. The last 4 years, I've been chair of the House Transportation Committee. Enjoyed that very much, and that takes a lot of time. As the Speaker indicated, it is a committee that develops a budget. And so a lot of work goes into making sure we get the priorities right about how we spend the dollars that are collected from our transportation revenues. I also serve on the Environment and Energy Committee and enjoy that work as well. It has a good connection with transportation because by way of example, carbon usage, the largest carbon usage in the state of Washington comes from the transportation sector. And that's an environmental problem that we must address. So pleasure to be here. Look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining today and taking the time out of your day. Yasmin Trudeau. I'm the newest member of the 27th LD delegation. I was appointed in November, officially November 2nd by the County Council, and have really tried to hit the ground running. I have actually never served in a sort of public official appointed or elected capacity. So it's all pretty new to me in that way. But I was very lucky to have served as the legislative director for our state's Attorney General, Bob Ferguson. So at least familiar with the process. And I think that makes me even more appreciative that I have two seatmates, the chair of transportation and the Speaker of the House, who I've been able to learn from. And it makes me feel really lucky that we have this much knowledge and expertise here in our city and in our district. So the three committees that I sit on are the three that I requested, which I feel really lucky about. That's Housing, Human Services, and I serve as the vice chair of the Law and Justice Committee in the Senate. So all very relevant issues from all the issues that our community is facing. So just really appreciative, and also look forward to the questions.
All right, great. And we'll jump right in with a question from Naomi. And Naomi asks, what were your focuses at the start of session?
Well, maybe I'll just kick off at a very high level. There were, for the House Democrats, and I really think these fall into the same categories for the Senate, I think, but we had 4 priority areas that we worked in this session. The first was economic well-being for Washingtonians. And one of the things that we have seen over many kind of economic downturns and challenges over our history is that folks who move into these times who are in a fairly good situation come out of them doing okay, but people who go in really on the edge or having a difficult time come out of challenging times in a much worse position. And we were really committed to making sure that people were doing better coming out of the pandemic, not that no one was doing worse. And so our focus was really to make sure that everybody's economic well-being was improving. The second thing is that we wanted to make sure that we were serving Washingtonians in a way that the services were really most helpful to them and most useful to them. So we focused in that area. Our third area of priority, which was also an area of priority last year, was racial equity and justice, and advancing issues in that area. And it's taken us a long time to get where we're at, and it'll take us a long time to get to a better place. So that'll probably be a priority for us for a long time. And then the final focus area for us was addressing climate change, and our transportation package that Rep. Phi led on really was the marquee thing that we did related to climate change. There are literally dozens of bills and dozens and dozens of investments in our budget that address those 4 areas. We can talk about them more during the course of this, but I'll kick it over to Senator Trudeau and Rep. Phi. Senator Trudeau ran a number of bills that were highly successful this year, and Rep. Phi's leadership on the transportation package was extraordinary.
Senator Trudeau, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll just be really candid. I think being appointed in November and starting in January, I was just trying to figure out how I could represent, the constituents of this district as best I could. I did introduce 11 bills in a 60-day session, so a little ambitious, but I was able to get 5 priorities across. But my overall goal was to bring what I've experienced. I try to use my lived experience to inform, policy and budget priorities. So really thinking a lot about behavioral health support and just the different ways that mental and behavioral health have impacted our communities especially over the last 2 years. Childcare access issues, that's really relevant. I have a 3-year-old, and many of us have survived as parents during the pandemic, and thinking a lot about housing and homelessness, which is at the forefront, I think, of everybody's mind. So I tried to focus as best I could on not just bills that I introduced, but just those 3 areas and how we could push that forward through the budget and also through legislation. So, and then I just tried to hang on for the ride.
Well, you did a great job. So for me, it was trying to see if we, in a short legislative session, could advance some transportation investments for the good people of the state of Washington. Short sessions don't usually yield something as significant as a transportation package. But with great cooperation from the leadership in the Senate and the House, we were able to complete that. And it was a hope for and an opportunity we want to take advantage of, particularly because we had recently passed the Climate Commitment Act, which has investment dollars to reduce carbon and provide multimodal investments in active transportation and transit. And we also had the federal passage of the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment Act. But we needed more than that in order to address some very significant some opportunities, but also some critical investments that needed to be made. And we were able to do that. And I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions to discuss that. But we had a court case that required us to make investments and do the right environmental things to reinstitute passable fish passages that would work out for restoring our salmon. And then also we had very big challenges with the ferry system, and we really needed to upgrade our ferry. So those are just a couple of things, but it was fortuitous circumstances, but we were able to take advantage of the circumstances and get, I think, a very meaningful package past this session.
Great, thanks. And folks, for you out there watching us, please, if you have a question, enter it into the platform from which you're joining us. Our next question comes from Melissa, and Melissa has a question about housing. Melissa's asking asked what the legislature did this year about making housing more affordable.
Well, I guess I'll take that one, and then I would defer to the speaker who got to make sort of the big picture calls on budget and other issues. But we did a lot. That's what I honestly, when it comes to housing, I mean, there was $440 million dedicated to housing in the capital budget. That includes rapid capital housing acquisition. We got about $115 million in the Housing Trust Fund. There was about $15 million available for homeless youth facilities, about $9 million for competitive grants to local governments to assist in the cost of utility improvements for new affordable housing projects, and $2 million for rapid housing community preservation. So, which would go towards manufactured and mobile home communities. So those are a few of the highlights that were in there. I track capital budget closely. I actually see staff capital budget in the Senate. So it's an area that I'm a little more familiar with, but I don't know if the speaker or Chair Pye want to add into that, but there's a lot. There was a big focus on this issue, and I'm just really proud of my colleagues for all standing together on housing.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that I'm really excited about is that we have typically constructed low-income housing, and that's a lot of what the $500 million that we moved from the operating budget into the capital budget did this year. But for the first time, we've also invested in housing acquisition for people. And that, I think, is really important because as we start to see our work on racial equity moving forward, because of the history of redlining and Black, Indigenous, Asian American, and Latino communities not being able to buy housing, those families have a hard time accumulating assets as a family, right? One of the best ways you can do that is to acquire a house. And that creates great asset building in your family. So we invested, I think, about $25 million. It's a small dollar amount to start, but we'll continue to hopefully invest in that. And then we also focused a lot on people who are in rental housing, again, providing some rental assistance for folks, but also some mitigation funds to landlords also as people are moving into different places. And then utility assistance for people too, whether they're in a home that they own, in rental housing or whatnot. Actually, $160 million in utility assistance. So a lot of investments, and many of those investments, for example, the low income housing construction, we really do that with local cities and counties. So, watch for our cities and counties as they get engaged on this work too.
Great. And our next question comes from Laura. And Laura asks, what transportation fixes can our community expect to see this year?
Well, I think this year, what you're going to see in this year is we provided the remainder of the funds that are necessary to build out what is called the Gateway Project, both in South King County, but more importantly for this district, in the 27th district from I-5 and Fife into the Port of Tacoma. That construction, that contract has been let, and now we have all the funding that we need to build that out. So that project will be very visible as the construction begins, I guess, probably within a couple of months. We're going to be running pretty close to finishing up finally I-5 through Tacoma, and the which will add an HOV lane for folks to be able to use. So that extension now will go from where it leaves off currently at the King County line all the way to the Tacoma Mall. And in the package, we put additional funding in to carry that forward south to 512 and JBLM. So a lot of action on I-5 and related freeways, but there will also be some investments that will take place. You'll see more and more construction that we're facilitating with the Sound Transit build out south to the Tacoma Dome.
Hey, can we jump back a little bit on the housing? Because I really would love it if Senator Trudeau would talk to people about a couple of bills that she got passed this session related to housing locally that'll help us a lot here.
Thank you. Yeah, there were two bills that I introduced and were passed. One of them was around just reducing barriers for folks being able to pay rent and for landlords to have an easier time in collecting that rent, which now prior to the session, a property management company or a landlord could require that an individual only use an electronic payment portal. And what I heard from many people that I knew, my mom included, and what I'd heard from community, especially seniors on fixed income, is this was a really big barrier for folks. Not only did they they weren't as familiar with using online payment processes, but also having to pay. So there's a fees attached with that electronic portal. So that was sort of a low barrier issue that got a lot of support in both chambers. And the other one was around development of housing. So now there's a Senate Bill 5755 that passed and was just signed into law, focuses on the issue of unused surface lots and parking lots, which we see a lot of here in Tacoma. So it's actually a sales and use tax deferral to help with affordable housing development. And to the speaker's point earlier, that includes, when I talk about affordability, that includes both low income and workforce housing incentives in there. So those were just two areas that I was able to maybe make a little bit of impact that our community members can feel. So thank you, Speaker Jenkins. I appreciate that.
All right, great. And next we'll go to a question from John. And John has a question about, he asks, so what can the legislature do to help promote regrowing the tree canopy and creating pro-forest policies here and across the state? Has the legislature considered raising the limit on money to be directed to conservation districts?
Wow.
Well, I guess I'll just start off a little bit. I think that's a great, John, that's a great question. I don't think we've done very much. I'll have to go back and look and see. We have talked a bit about conservation districts. And one of the challenges is always that there are many, many junior taxing authorities in Washington state, a real plethora of them. And honestly, every time you prioritize one taxing district over another, then it has real challenges in terms of what those taxing districts can do, right? Metro parks versus conservation districts. So it probably is worth doing some real work on how those junior taxing districts are funded and are allowed to tax. We do have a tax structure work group that's been going for 2 years, and it's bipartisan, bicameral. We're expecting by the end of the year to get a lot of recommendations from them in part to just try to create a more progressive tax structure, or at least a less unfair tax structure than what we've got right now. Washington is considered to be the state that has the most unfair tax structure in the United States. So I'm hoping and expecting that we may see some recommendations about all these junior taxing districts that may help us develop a better approach to how we fund there. But I think great call out on tree canopy and something that we definitely can work on more.
Great. All right. Next question comes from Patricia. And Patricia would like to know how she can join the virtual town hall if she doesn't have a Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube account. So how can she see you guys elsewhere other than this virtual setting?
Well, we have a session coming up just next week on, I believe it's on the 3rd of December at the Norpoint Center from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we've done these for several years now, and it's always a great opportunity to really have a conversation with constituents because we really, as we do our work, we kind of get in our little areas of expertise, and we sometimes can really miss out on really what's on the mind of constituents within our district. So As I said, we have an opportunity, I believe it's on Tuesday at between 11 and 1 p.m. at the North Point Center for anybody within the district to join us.
And I would just add that I think, anybody that's interested in engaging, I think what I've found really great about this delegation is a value that I hold dear, which is accessibility. So I think if folks are really interested in digging in on tree canopies or whatever other issues, sometimes, I would say often the best solutions are derived from community. So there's lots of ways to access us. And I think there's going to be more than one coffee chat coming up as well. So the first one out of a few, and maybe I'll defer to the speaker if she knows the specifics on whether the other ones have been scheduled yet, but there will be more. So it's not like there's just one opportunity next week. Just next week happens to be the soonest one coming up.
Yeah, we're definitely trying to do them across from now until December. So I would suggest that if you want to know more about when they are, to email our offices. And actually, any of you who are on this call right now can, if you want to meet with any of us, you can email the office. I'm sure that our email addresses will come up on the screen at some point, and set up a meeting with us. We're happy to do that. It's one of my favorite things to do, is just meet with constituents in local coffee shops and have great coffee.
Great. Up next, we have a question from Hannah. Hannah asks, what are you all doing to ensure community safety?
Sure. I don't know. I'll just start by saying I think community safety is part of why I picked the three committees that I picked, right? Because I think it really is a three-legged stool, which includes a component of public safety, which is the way that our systems interact with individuals, right? So policing, the judicial system, but also looking at ways to promote health and well-being in our communities. So that is, proper access to the services that we need, behavioral health, mental health support, and making sure that, we're incorporating the ways that we can stabilize our community members too. So access to housing. So I sort of see the three-legged stool, and I think the legislature did an incredible job. I certainly can't take credit for the conversations that I was a part of that were already happening around investments in all of those areas. So I think there's lots to be proud of and lots to point at, but I defer to my seatmates if there's any specifics that you all want to address.
I'll say that I think our focus in the House and generally as the legislature is we want to, what we're trying to get to is we want to make sure that law enforcement has the tools that they need to protect people and is also held accountable when they violate the public's trust. Right, which is, I think, also what people really want. So this year we did a lot of work to kind of fine tune our accountability bills that we passed last year to make sure that they were really working in community. But then what we also have seen is, as we see in many, many areas where there's a shortage of people moving into them, a shortage of workforce. So we also really increased the funding by almost 50% of the Criminal Justice Training Commission to train more officers. Because what we want is officers who are out there, most officers are out there trying to do really good work and they want to be well trained so we can get more local officers and state patrol officers out there. Out of the Transportation Committee came a bill that will diversify our state patrol. And then one of the other big issues, I think we probably invested maybe $20 million more or so in law enforcement. And one of the big areas was to update pensions for law enforcement officers, which is another big issue for recruitment, to try and recruit and get more people to come into the field. So there are other smaller things that we also funded, but worked there. And then I just want to talk, I know I did this in the last town hall, but I just think this has been such a really good idea that we moved forward. Is every place I go, I hear about catalytic converter theft. Every neighborhood in Tacoma has this problem. So we really wanted to deal with it here in Washington. And one of the stuff we saw from all the research is just like, it's already criminal to steal a catalytic converter. Making it more criminal doesn't do anything to suppress thefts. So that's what we wanted to do. And we used some good national data to design a program in which now we're focused on the third-party purchasers. So the legislation that we passed this year will say if you are a purchaser of catalytic converters, you have to get proof that the person who's selling it to you owns the vehicle that the catalytic converter came from, and you're going to be liable if you don't do that. And we've seen in other states that has started to drive down the demand of catalytic converters, and really address this issue of catalytic converter theft. So we're trying to adopt really smart policy that will actually have an effect on the crime issues that we're seeing.
In addition to what the speaker commented on in terms of diversifying the employees of the Washington State Patrol, so they really are people that represent the different communities we have within this wonderful state. We made permanent this year, committed to paying competitive salaries for our state troopers. They suffered for many, many years with pay that was quite a bit lower than many of the cities in the state of Washington, and it was hard to keep the state patrol at a reasonable size of workforce. So that piece of legislation makes it permanent that we're going to be paying a competitive wage, and hopefully that'll result in having people stay with the state patrol and make it a career.
All right. Our next question comes from Thomas. And Thomas asked, despite record revenue, why didn't the legislature cut taxes?
Well, we actually did, but let me talk about what I think our focus was. Our focus, one, we had a significant amount of both state revenue this year, but even more one-time federal dollars. So I just want to be clear that long-term tax reductions on one-time only money doesn't really work. But the other thing is, when I talked at the beginning of this session, that was our focus, was making sure that people come out of the economic downturn and the pandemic in a really healthy way. So our work was to invest in businesses and in families that were having real challenges. So, for example, we invested $100 million in the hospitality industry this year, because we heard from the hospitality industry that not a tax cut, but us investing money in that industry is what they really needed to rebuild. We also heard that from the arts community and invested $20 million there. One of the things we heard from our small business community, though, is that that a B&O tax cut for our small and Main Street businesses would really help them keep their feet under them. So we did that, and we're going to have 125,000 small businesses, small and Main Street businesses in Washington State that are either going to end up paying no B&O tax or a much reduced B&O tax. So we tried to be targeted to have an effect, and have the effect that folks were asking us to have, help them have. So that's how we focused our revenue. It doesn't always make sense to do a broad-based tax cut when you have the most regressive tax structure in the country, because you end up returning money to folks who maybe are at the higher end of the scale sometimes. So our regressive tax structure really creates problems for tax cuts too.
And I would just add on to that a lot of those cuts focused on, relief for small business, right, or sort of opportunities for economic growth, making sure that we're stabilizing our business communities so that those investments can go back. We aren't a healthy, thriving community if our businesses are closing. So we also did things like waiving liquor license fees and others to an industry, when we talk about hospitality, like restaurants and bars that have really been struggling to keep their doors open if they've been able to at all. So I think thinking about how that actually is a shared benefit for all of us, and will lead to more economic growth in the future is something that I took away from those budget discussions.
Up next, we have a question from Jerome. Jerome asks, with student loan payments paused again by the federal government, what are you doing to help make college more affordable for people?
I can talk a lot about this, but I feel like I'm talking too much. So I'm trying to pause and wait for somebody else.
Well, there was I would highlight there was a student loan program that was introduced by Representative Sullivan in the House that got passed on a 1% interest rate for student loans. I would defer to you, Speaker Jenkins, because you probably are way more familiar with the policy, but we did get that off the floor, and that is that is unique for Washington State. I think we're a leader in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, so one, we have the Washington College Grant, which actually funds a huge percentage now of students who are going to college in Washington State, fully funds their tuition and some money toward room and board. So one of the other things we did in the budget is expanded that college grant this year, because we have a lot of people who are going off to college who childcare is a huge issue for them. Transportation is a huge issue for them. Food is a huge issue. So provided more money into the college grant and allowed that money to be spent on some of those items to make it easier for folks to go to college. Then added to that is the 1% student loan program, which will be the lowest interest rate in the nation for student loans. It's lower than any of the national loans that people can get. And this is, again, to help folks who, we go up pretty high into the federal poverty level for folks to be able to get the college grant, as well as this loan. So it'll help people be able to bridge. And then the other thing we did was invested a fair amount of money to provide assistance in high schools to help students fill out their financial aid form, to get more students who would naturally be eligible for this to be able to apply for financial aid and get the college grant, get these loans, and see that they actually can go to school without coming out with a huge debt.
All right, and folks, if you're watching us and you got a question, please put it into that chat, and we'll try to get to you. And we've actually got a question from Paula from the chat here right now. Paula says, "I understand that legislators have very few staff resources. This impacts your ability to communicate with constituents, do research on bills, etc. We're losing women and minorities as a result. What can be done to change this?"
Well, I mean, I guess since I'm a woman and a minority, I'll go there. The challenges are real. I think the way that the legislature has been designed was as a part-time legislature, but for communities like ours and many across the state, we have really engaged constituencies and issues that really continue throughout the year. So I think the challenge is the way that, it was sort of originally set up. But I do think that there's a big opportunity with those challenges, right? So part of the reason that I've appreciated being able to be in this seat and continue to lift up my voice is how it is that my experiences, my lived experiences, can come into play in the way that my colleagues can help support one another. And I think that I've tried to do that. I've communicated to both of my seatmates on here, and they've certainly showed up for me when I've had a toddler bouncing all around, or that's been sick, or that I can't make it to something. So I think figuring out how to collaborate and just really focus on teamwork until we can talk more about, what systems changes are possible. But I really think there are constraints in the way that the legislature has been set up, and that's not really anything that the three of us can take on and resolving quickly. So I would open up the floor to others, but I think the challenges are real, but I think the opportunities are great. And I look forward to continuing to figure out ways to recruit and retain people that have that lived experience so we can continue to hear from them and support them.
I just would say ditto to Senator Trudeau. But one thing I do want to clarify, Paula, we actually have more women and more people of color serving in the legislature now than in the history of this legislature. And certainly since I came, those numbers are growing. And that's actually part of why we're now seeing the difficulties in being a legislator and these challenges that Senator Trudeau mentioned, because we have more people who have kids that they're responsible for. We have more people who are, their economic situation is the economic situation of members is much more diverse than it used to be. So we have many more members who need to work while they're serving and things like that. So this highlights the problems that we have to solve. I'm not going to tell you we've solved them all, but I think actually it's been a gift of having more women and more people of color serving that's brought this to us as things we have to work on and figure out how to address so that we can continue to build and keep the diversity of the legislature that's been growing.
All right. Next, we'll go to Samia. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Samia asks, I'd like to ask about state bankruptcy law reform and the possibility for proposed legislation for the upcoming year. Hundreds of working families are being dragged down by our unjust system that favors large corporate, often healthcare creditors.
I just want to give a shout out. I think it's Samia. And if it's the Samia I know, hey, Samia. But it looks like Speaker Jenkins was about to speak up. I know we had a couple of bills that were introduced but didn't go through. One around prejudgment interest, and other areas of focus. But Speaker, go ahead.
Samia, right on to your question. I've spent a lot of time working on both before I became Speaker, working on charity care, and the other issue is collections, medical collections. And we made a ton of progress before I became Speaker on that, like not allowing collections to have interest rates to them, not allowing them to, I mean, it used to be that I don't think there were hardly any doctor's offices did this, but from the minute that you went to see a physician in their office, they could start charging interest on your bill. They can't do that anymore. But I think that, medical bankruptcy is one of the biggest reasons for bankruptcy in the state. And that's why we did things like, now for diabetics, insulin sometimes is as much as $600 for a bottle. It's going to be $75 for a bottle in Washington state, at least for the next year. We're hoping that the federal government will also address this, but we may need to extend it longer. We will have the best charity care policies in the nation as a result of Tara Simmons' bill. We've also prohibited balanced or surprise billing, where you go into the emergency room or you go somewhere and you get treated for by someone that you didn't realize was outside of your network for your insurance network, and then you get a gigantic bill. We've said that it's not legal to send a surprise bill to somebody in that way. So we keep on working on these things around the edges. Everyone knows that we need to have more comprehensive reform in the healthcare industry. And that is going to have to come likely at the federal level, but we're going to keep on chipping away at it here at the state level.
And I would just add, Samia, if you have specific thoughts on this would be, please reach out to me or to Representative Fye or, Speaker Jenkins about if you have a particular experience or thing that you want to highlight, because we might not know the prompt for the question, and maybe the solution comes from what you've experienced. So please do reach out.
All right. And our next question is about healthcare. One of the top priorities is affordable and accessible healthcare. What progress did we make toward improving our healthcare system this year?
Well, I just noted a bunch of our three bills, and I just want to tell a little side story about this. I was at Green River Community College on Friday and listening to the president as he talked about these things, and our members of Congress were sitting right in front of me, and it felt really good. I'm not saying that like we've perfected everything in healthcare, but it felt really good to have the president talking about doing insulin $35 a bottle, and I got to lean forward to our members of Congress and say, we did that. And then the next thing he talked about was balanced billing, surprise billing. And I leaned forward and I said, we did that. Then he didn't talk about charity care, but it was really great to know that we are working hard to be kind of on the forefront and help the nation, be a leader for the nation on this kind of stuff. But we also did things on telemedicine. We've learned a lot during COVID that people can get great medicine through just the phone or, video conferencing. And we had this weird glitch in our law that didn't allow full reimbursement for telephone calls. And so now we will allow that. We did a lot of stuff on behavioral health, which Senator Trudeau has talked about. So we've made a lot of advancements. I don't want to repeat everything, and I'm talking ad nauseum here. So I'm hoping we'll move to questions on Rep 5's topics and quiz him a little bit. I'm clearly very excited about everything we've done and getting all your questions.
Our next question comes from Addie. Addie has a question about hate crimes and is a hate crime survivor herself, and she'd like to know what the legislature is doing to support survivors.
I'll just speak up here. So I want to highlight that there was a hate crimes working group that happened at the Attorney General's office. There were some recommendations that came forward. I think you'll continue to see policymakers introduce those recommendations and look at how we can better address them. But I will say, Addie, the specific question that I'm seeing in the comments in terms of holding police accountable around police reports, it might be really nice. Well, it would be really nice if you would reach out and share your experience on this, because I think it's hard to answer a question if we haven't heard what the problem or the issue is. But I think hate crimes is at the forefront of a lot of folks' mind. And I was formerly a commissioner on the the Commission of Asian Pacific American Affairs in the governor's office. So the hate crimes issue is alive and well, but I think the opportunity to hear from folks, especially survivors, is going to be really important in informing how we move forward on policy. So just please do reach out, and there'll be details about, oh, there they are, how you can contact us, but would love to hear from you.
All right. And up next, we have a question from Tom. Tom has a question about this year's police accountability clarification bills. House Bill 1719 and 1735 did a good job of cleaning up language on last year's great reform bills. House Bill 2037 feels like a rollback on important protections. Terry stops are a key example where officer discretion is unfairly applied. Why did our district support this?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah,
Aaron?
sorry. So Tom says that House Bill 1719 and 1735 did a good job of cleaning up language on last year's great reform bills. But he says that House Bill 2037 feels like a rollback on important protections. And he adds that Terry stops are a key example where officer discretion is unfairly applied. And why did our district support this?
Senator Trudeau, do you want to talk about the details of the bill for folks, and then maybe we can all talk about where we're at on the bill? Yeah,
because I think you'll find that all of our sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you. I think you'll find that we all took different approaches and come from different places and in our lived experience on these issues. So I'm not sure. I think what threw me for a loop was, why did our district sort of broadly support these? But I'd say 2037, there were a couple of things that were really key in that bill. One of them was around defining what force is, right? So I think there needed to be a clear definition, and we heard that both from community and from law enforcement. And I also think that there was, an opportunity to look at where we found that folks were relying on some ambiguity that was left. And there were a lot of reforms last year, so there's going to be ambiguity when you have large reforms. I mean, we had 13 massive reforms, I think more than any other state in the country, that did reduce police violence. I think it was 60% in terms of how many individuals were actually killed by law enforcement. Now, I will just admit that I took a different vote on that, but mostly because I felt like there was an opportunity to narrow the scope of that bill, and that didn't happen. And so that's where me and my seatmates may have differed a little bit, and I would defer to them on what their thoughts were. But I think there were many reasons why a version of that bill was important to pass. So I just want to be clear. There were some key things that it did that we needed to have happen. And we heard that both from, Attorney General guidance on evaluating the bills that passed last year. We heard it from community, and we heard it from law enforcement. I did vote yes when we narrowed it to looking at a criminal offense as opposed to just Terry stops. And so that's where, I differed a bit. I felt like we could have narrowed that, but unfortunately, when it came to the Senate floor, that is not where some of my colleagues were at. So, but I do think there were things in there we needed to do.
All right, next we'll go to Alexis. Alexis asks, what did the legislature do to help support our K-12 students and teachers and their parents as they return to full in-person learning?
A ton. And Jake, this is an area that you work in a lot. So I just want to make sure if you have anything you want to start off with.
Well, our best resource that we have is the great relationship the three of us have particularly with the Tacoma School District. And there were some real challenges that they faced because of the pandemic and numerous outcomes that come from the pandemic. Just to state one is the challenge that young people have with mental health. And there's a growing concern about youth suicide. So we look to our school districts in terms of, and it isn't the same for each one, but we look to our school districts to let us know where the additional revenues ought to go to assist them in meeting their needs and being able to continue to do the great work that has been done. So I don't spend a lot of time on a lot of education issues because of my transportation work. Is a different budget area, but I think we have listened and we have tried to fill the gaps, and I think we did a good job of filling the gaps. But as things progress, there's going to be more things that come up that we're going to have to address.
Yeah, I mean, some of the, let me just briefly kind of respond to the question about 2037 and talk about my vote on that. I think Senator Trudeau kind of outlined what the bill was about for people. And my take on this is that we're going to continue doing work on law enforcement issues and accountability issues for a very long time. But the clarifications that we passed this year were necessary in part because law enforcement is implementing them. And so you've got to have folks able to implement the law and not be confused about that. Now, it may happen that in years to come, we will continue, like there will be more readiness both in the community and in the law enforcement community to take more action on this. But I think this, for me, this was the right choice to move forward on this year. On K-12, I just want to say it's just, we've done just amazing work. Some of it is really kind of heartbreaking work. For example, because schools were closed for so much of the year, the way we typically fund schools is about how many we say butts are in seats. And it would have meant that many of our schools would have lost funding. So we did not want that to happen. So we stabilized funding there. We also really saw that and have learned that we have a lot of parents where English isn't the first language. So we passed a bill to provide more language access to parents, because all parents want to be involved in their kids' education, and you want to make sure that they can be by having language access. And this is especially challenging for kids who have individual learning plans, and those parents who really want to be involved in helping their student out. So that bill will really help. We are going to, in the next year, every school in the state of Washington will be funded for at least one school counselor and one nurse. And then depending on the size of the school, more will come. We've seen that our children's mental health has really been challenged through the pandemic. And this is a way that we can really help our young people recover from the trauma that they've been through. We expanded free school meals. We also expanded outdoor education, which was really great because we've been having all these kids with a lot of screen time. So getting more outdoor education. And I live not very far from Sherman Elementary. And during the course of session, I got letters from 5th graders at Sherman Elementary really urging us to pass the outdoor education bill. And the very first letter that I read said to me, "Why are you treating us as puny mortals?" And it had a question mark, and then every other statement had an exclamation mark behind it about why we should pass outdoor education. And the letters were awesome from young people, so it was great to be able to do that. So those are just some of the things that we've done, that we did on education. We also actually extended the ability for more retired teachers to come back and substitute, because we know we've got a shortage of teachers. So lots of things, big and little.
All right, our next question, and folks, if you're paying, again, we're getting close to the end here, but please, if you've got a question, please put it in the chat, and we can hopefully get to you here. Our next question comes from oh, sorry, Senator Trudeau.
No, I was just going to lift up, 3 of the things that I've experienced and felt, and just want to take a moment to pause and thank my colleagues for their support on this. But the access to school counselors, the free school meals, as someone who grew up on free and reduced lunch, that is just such a huge thing. And I know it'll be a huge thing to our, the kids in our community to have access to that meal expansion, and then language access. I also come from a limited English proficiency family and have a brother who has an individual education plan, who goes to Stadium High School now. And so I just want to thank everyone who worked on those 3 issues, because those were ones that I felt really deeply when they came forward. And I know other families will feel them too.
Great. Thank you. Next question comes from Zoe. Zoe asks, climate change continues to ravage our state with increased forest fires, extreme weather, and food supply shortages. What did the legislature do to address climate change this session?
Well, I'll take that one. I think the biggest thing that we did was we took the resources that come from the implementation of the Climate Commitment Act that was passed in the 2021 session, and we applied that. That was over $5 billion over the next 16 years, and we applied that to making transit more accessible, particularly in identified disadvantaged communities. We worked on raising the funding that has been really pretty much neglected in terms of active transportation, so people have choices about how they get from one place to another, and obviously there's substantial health benefits from investments in active transportation. The transit piece of this includes free ridership on transit system, including the ferries and Amtrak for individuals 18 and younger, so that we can make it possible so that young people can experience how beneficial it is to use public transit to get around, and how for many people it isn't all that necessary to have their own vehicle. And then on carbon reduction, there's a lot of, I think about 40% of the carbon usage in the state of Washington is from transportation. So we're going to be starting to make investments in things like drayage trucks, which are generally older trucks that serve the port areas, which tend to be have poor air quality. We're going to be making investments to change out those drayage trucks. There's going to be big investments in electric vehicle incentives. You look for those to happen, as well as electric vehicle infrastructure. So transportation is the biggest and hardest area to make changes in carbon, but that's where we put our big focus this last session. So fully nearly a third of the money that was in the transportation package went towards carbon reduction.
All right, thank you for that. And I think our final question tonight comes from Lucy. And Lucy asks what the legislature did to address homelessness and support youth experiencing homelessness this year.
Sure. I guess I'll jump in unless somebody else would like to. There were a couple of things that I mentioned earlier. As far as youth experiencing homelessness, I did have a bill that passed around it was created the opportunity for unaccompanied homeless youth to consent to their own healthcare decisions. So what we found out hearing from homeless youth shelters that there were barriers to things like accessing COVID vaccines, accessing COVID testing, which was then forcing shelters to make really tough decisions about who they were allowing to stay there. And that obviously further destabilizes if you can't get into a shelter and you're particularly vulnerable if you're a youth. So I was able to work with advocates and the support of my seatmates to get that bill across. But there was also, investments made in access. I'm trying to look for the specific number, but there was money for housing specifically for homeless youth that was in the budget. There's lots of other investments. When you look at human service investments, it's hard to say, okay, this is all directed at folks experiencing homelessness, because I think when you invest in expanding food access, when you invest in behavioral and mental health supports, that in turn is going to impact large swaths of our community, including those experiencing homelessness. So, and that rapid housing acquisition in the capital budget, that's a really big deal, because that will allow for that wraparound service for housing to be built with intentional wraparound services to get folks where they need to go and stabilize to then get into more permanent housing solutions.
All right. And that's the end of our virtual town hall tonight. So thank you for everybody that joined us and took time to participate. I'll turn it back over now to the legislators for some closing remarks. Senator Trudeau, since you wrapped up last time, would you like to start? And then we'll go to Representative Fye and Speaker Jenkins.
I just wrap up by emphasizing what I said earlier, which is please don't hesitate to reach out. I think often people feel like, oh, well, I have to wait until there's a town hall or there's, sort of an issue that I can't ignore. And then I'll figure out a way to communicate it. But our emails are in the comments section. All of our information, our office numbers are public. So if you have certain issues that you didn't get a chance to ask the question, or you just want an opportunity to chat more thoroughly about some of the answers we provided, just please reach out. I think we're all committed to being accessible and having those conversations, but also take us up on those coffee chats.
Yes, so we have the community chat Tuesday, May 3rd from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the center at North Point. Excellent opportunity to have those conversations with us. The best time to reach us, I think, is before session gets underway, when we have a little bit more time to have a conversation and not feel the rush of all the work that has to happen within that limited time period during the legislative session. It's a good time. We do all make ourselves available for appointments, individual appointments or group appointments. And that's a great time to be able to have the dialogue that's necessary so that we can actually help frame potential legislation that might be helpful to different members of the community or more broader issues that affect the entire state. So we look forward to the engagement. The emails are important, especially those that are individual and that come from the heart of people and the experiences that we're having. There's no substitute for having the personal experiences of members of this legislative district.
The only thing I'll add in wrap up is I think one of the things that is hard for people sometimes in terms of reaching out to us is it feels like a natural thing to us and it might feel intimidating to you. But we are really excited to learn from you, and you don't have to have all the solutions to the problems or even really fully understand the problem. You just have to have your perspective of what's happening. The other thing is, like, sometimes you'll meet with us and we'll realize this isn't really a state legislative issue. It's a local issue or it's a congressional issue, but we can also link you to the right people there. So don't feel like you have to figure out, like, exactly who's the right person and what's the right solution to everything before you come. That's what we're here to do, is try and help explore the right solution with you. And we have incredible staff that will do research to try and help us find the right solution for the problems and challenges that you bring. So I guess I would just urge you, if you're feeling intimidated at all, please try to not do that, and just know that we're excited to just be able to talk with you and find out what's going on and see what we can do to help.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And please do reach out if you have any lingering questions. Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.